Max was a young, handsome, and strong man, but he had one serious flaw, or rather a childhood phobia: the fear of the dead and everything to do with death. It would seem that it's not even worth talking about, after all. We all have fears that have been haunting us since childhood. Most of us have learned to live with them and don't even give them much thought. But not Max. In Max's case, his childhood fear, which he never managed to overcome, played a huge role in his life. This story is about the dramatic effect fears can have in our life, predetermining its most unexpected turns, as well as about a miracle that helped one man deal with this problem. Ever since he was little, whenever Max misbehaved, his grandmother always talked about evil spirits to scare him into obedience. And while other children could simply disregard such threats, little Max took them seriously and ended up carrying this fear through his life. He was truly afraid of his grandmother's threats. The old woman lived with Max's family and died peacefully in her sleep when Max was 8 years old. The boy was standing at the door when her body, covered with a white sheet, was taken out of the house. At that moment, a breeze seemed to have come out of nowhere. It blew the sheet off the head of the deceased. The grandmother's white, lifeless face with blue lips made an indelible impression on the child, making his fear of death even stronger. Max often got in trouble because of his phobia. When other boys in school learned about his fear, they intentionally told all kinds of mystical stories around him and played all kinds of cruel pranks on him. The situation got out of control, and Max's parents ended up transferring the boy to another school. But the kids at that school soon learned about Max's secret, and the bullying continued. Max's worst enemy was Andrew. The boy lived next door and knew about Max's phobia. He regularly persuaded all the other boys in the neighborhood to bully Max, coming up with a variety of pranks. At first, the boy's parents didn't seem too concerned about their son's fears, believing that he would grow out of it. But when the boy got older and his fears didn't go away, instead of supporting his son or seeking help from a specialist, the boy's father started shaming him and calling him a coward. "You have to deal with this on your own, son. You're a man. Get rid of that nonsense in your head," the father kept saying. After successfully graduating from high school and college, Max got a job and moved out of his parents' house. Now he didn't have to deal with his former classmates who bullied him, or Andrew and his gang, who pretty much made his life living hell. Unfortunately, it seemed that Max's fears followed him everywhere nonetheless, accompanying him in his life. He regularly stumbled upon funeral homes, funeral processions, obituaries, and all kinds of stories that ended in death and a cemetery. Max tried to avoid such encounters and tried to ignore what he saw or heard as best he could. Life went on as usual. Max was a very good plumber, so he quickly was promoted to foreman. One day, when Max came to visit his parents, he saw a beautiful young woman. The man froze as if rooted to the spot. Her eyes, her hair, and her smile immediately won over his heart. She walked past and smiled, having caught his gaze full of admiration. It took Max just one moment to decide that he would do everything in his power to marry that woman one day. Suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Andrew. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. Despite the hell Andrew put Max through when they were little, the young man didn't hold a grudge against Andrew and was genuinely glad to see him. Andrew immediately told Max that he had his own business and was more than happy to point out that he was better off than Max, but the latter didn't care. "Listen, do you happen to know who that woman is?" Max asked. Andrew lived in the area, so he knew that young woman's name. It was Melanie, and that she had recently rented an apartment nearby. "What, do you like her?" Andrew asked sarcastically. "Yeah, I'd do anything to get a date with her." Max suddenly opened up. "You're not exactly her type. Women like her aren't only interested in your looks. They need something more, something you don't have a lot of. I mean, money." Andrew scoffed once again. But Max didn't pay much attention to Andrew's words. After that first encounter, he directed all his energy at conquering Melanie's heart. He courted the woman as best he could, and she clearly didn't mind his attention. Unfortunately, Max couldn't have known that another man was also courting Melanie at the same time. It was Andrew. He wasn't interested in her before, but as soon as he learned that Max liked her, he decided to make his life miserable yet again and, at the same time, use it as a chance to prove that women were more attracted to money than anything else. Melanie liked both young men. She was honestly confused and couldn't decide which one of them she liked more. Max was certainly in the lead in terms of personal qualities, but Andrew's wealth promised stability and a carefree life. Having noticed that Melanie was on the fence, Max decided to take a desperate step. He used all of his savings to buy an expensive ring and a huge bouquet and decided to propose to Melanie. But an old woman died in Melanie's apartment building that day, and thus, when Max came over, he stumbled upon the funeral home staff. Max didn't even have time to come to his senses, as he found himself back out on the street. The only thing he could think about was getting as far away from that place as possible. The man went back to see Melanie in the evening, but no one opened the door for him. The neighbor told Max that some expensive car had come for Melanie. She got into it and left. Max soon learned that Melanie and Andrew got married. The young man took it very hard. "It's okay. Your whole life is still ahead of you. You'll find another woman. Don't you worry about it." His parents tried to support him, but Max knew that it wasn't going to happen. He was a one-woman man, and his feelings for Melanie were very strong. Years passed. One day, one of his friends advised Max on a way to get rid of his phobia, which was clearly getting in his way. The idea was to get a job at the cemetery, fighting fire with fire, as they say. Max decided to give it a try. The man got a job as the cemetery caretaker. It was his first day at work. The young man managed to stay composed during the day, but when it started getting dark, he became more and more anxious. He felt his hands and legs begin to tremble, and his heart rate quicken. No matter how hard Max tried to pull himself together, all he wanted to do was drop everything and run away. He was terribly scared. "You're a man. Don't be a coward," his father's words popped into Max's mind. The young man struggled to keep his emotions in check. It was dark and quiet. Suddenly, Max saw the silhouette of a man with a large bouquet of flowers leaning over one of the graves. That's strange. Who'd come to the cemetery at such a late hour? Max thought. The man stood at the grave for about 2 minutes and was about to leave. Suddenly, people in masks and white robes appeared, as if out of nowhere. At first, there were 2 of them. Then, there were 4. The man didn't even have time to step away from the grave. Suddenly, he pressed his hand to his chest and collapsed. 2 muffled pops were heard later. Then one of the masked faces turned towards the building where Max was sitting and took a couple of steps in his direction. Max didn't see anything else. He started running as fast as he could. He must have never run so fast in his entire life. He ran out onto the highway and stopped the first car he saw. The driver didn't want to give Max a ride because, frankly, he looked crazy. However, he pulled out several banknotes from his pocket, threw them at the driver, after which the man changed his mind and let Max get into the car. Max was shaking. Once he was back home, the man took a shower several times, drank a sedative, and laid down, covering his head with a blanket. The only thing the man wanted to do was forget about what happened at the cemetery and never think of it again. Sometime later, Max got a visit from a man who introduced himself as Andrew's lawyer. Having heard Andrew's name, Max couldn't help but feel aversion for the person who always treated him so badly. The thing is, Andrew is under arrest on a murder charge. It all went down at the cemetery. He went there at night to visit the grave of his parents. There he witnessed a confrontation between the members of some cult. There was a shootout, and one person was killed. Andrew was charged with murder. There is no evidence to prove his innocence, so he's facing a serious sentence. As far as I know, you worked as a caretaker at that cemetery that night. Did you maybe see something there? Or know of something that could help? So that's who the man with the flowers was. But why should I help the person who ruined my life? Who took Melanie away from me? Max thought as scenes from that night filled his head. But he really didn't kill anyone. Max testified in court. Moreover, he provided a video from his phone that proved Andrew's innocence. That night, he decided to record what was happening. He was terrified and sort of expected something otherworldly to happen, like the dead rising from their graves or some evil spirits roaming the cemetery. Max decided that if he made a video of what was going on, then no one would say that he was crazy and imagined it all, and then his fear would become justified. There was enough light coming from the street lamp for the video to clearly show what went down that night. The charges against Andrew were dropped right there in the courtroom. He thanked Max profusely for saving him. He confessed that he only started dating Melanie to spite Max and sincerely apologized for it. He also apologized for bullying him when they were little. Then, Andrew told Max that he and Melanie got a divorce, that she was now very sick, and that she was so mad at Andrew she refused to accept any help from him. Max went to see Melanie that very evening. When she opened the door, he saw the very woman who stole his heart the moment they met. Although the disease left a noticeable imprint on her appearance, he was ready to give up anything just to get her to feel better, and he succeeded. His care, his desire to live, and the doctor's professionalism did their job. Melanie was on the mend, but she wasn't the only one who got better. Max got rid of his fears and phobias. Having spent so much time in the hospital, having witnessed a variety of cases, many of which ended tragically, he didn't get afraid, nor did he run away. Love for Melanie and the desire to save her healed him.